for NBC4 and a columnist with the current newspapers. Tom Sherwood, welcome.
Hey, good afternoon.
Also joining us in studio is David Trone. He's a Democratic candidate for Congress in Maryland's 8th District. He's the owner of Total Wine and More, a wine retailer in Maryland and around the country. David Trone, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tom Sherwood, the Pepco-Exelon merger was approved this week by the D.C. Public Service Commission. Somehow, mysteriously, the provision that would have avoided a rate hike for D.C. ratepayers until the year 2019 disappeared. What happened to it?
Well, we could spend the whole program on the Pepco-Exelon merger, but the Public Service Commission finally this week voted 2-1 to do it. There is some money in the merger proposal that the Public Service Commission could use to hold off the severity of any rate increases. But this was a 2-year battle, up and down votes by the Public Service Commission. A lot of the business community supported it. A lot of people in different organizations didn't. The General Services Administration doesn't like the final result. It buys power for the federal government. Mayor Bowser doesn't like the final result. Carl Racine, the Attorney General, doesn't like the final result. But we are going to have this
People's
merger.
Council doesn't like the final
And
result.
several council members don't. Mayor Bowser, I want to point out, she said this will mean rate increases. And I talked to Pepco's people today, and they said they have suspended any rate increase proposals for the last couple of years while this was going forward, and that they are spending money, and they do expect at some point in the fairly near future to file for a rate increase. But that has nothing to do specifically with the merger.
So what are the possibilities left for those who oppose this?
I've asked the opponents of that, is there any legal action? Is there court action? There's enough dispiritedness by the opponents now. I haven't heard any specific action of people trying to keep this merger from going forward.
How about the ratepayers, the ones who suddenly lost the fact that they won't be getting a rate increase until 2019? Is it possible that you could get a class action suit coming from?
I don't think so. Public utility management is incredibly complex around the country. We had 3 commissioners. Mr. Phillips was always for a merger, virtually any version that would come forward. Betty Ann Kane, the chairperson,
she opposed it,
was totally against it, and said so even at the last vote. She was the one vote against it.
Yep.
And then Ms. Jessamy, I always get her first name wrong.
Don't
but anyway,
ask me.
She was the one who seemed to wobble back and forth, and I'm still not clear where she stood on it all. But the main thing is she tried to broker some compromise, and now she's voted for it. Appears to be a done deal.
Even these things go forward, even though they have opposition in the state of Maryland. The Attorney General for the state of Maryland, Brian Frosh,
Yes.
opposed it in Maryland, and I think filed suit at some point, didn't he? I'm not sure about that, but I'd be interested in hearing where you stand on it, David Trone.
It certainly looks from everything you've read and understand that Exelon's a great operator, and they're going to bring some economies and efficiencies to Pepco, given their size is so much larger. And also they've got a really clean power base with a lot of nuclear plants, a really strong record on reliability. So it definitely, I think, will be a positive for the people of Washington, D.C.
The other thing that puzzled me a little bit, Tom Sherwood, is that Jim Diniger said that if the Public Service Commission did not approve this, it would give the impression that Washington, D.C. was not business friendly. Well,
I have a lot of respect for him, but I'm not sure that's much more than a talking point.
Yes.
Some people do think Exelon is in fact an old energy company, that its power nuclear plants have some issues, that it is a power generator, whereas Pepco is a pass-through agency. It doesn't own power generators. It doesn't own anything. It just simply passes the energy from various providers to the customers. The one thing that was certain, the stock of Pepco went up nearly $5 a share after the commission approved this merger.
I mentioned our guest is David Trone. He's a Democratic candidate for Congress in Maryland's 8th District. If you have questions or comments for him, you can start calling now, 800-433-8850. You can send email to kojo@wamu.org. Shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show, or go to our website, kojoshow.org. Join the conversation there. Before we begin our conversation specifically with David Trone, Tom Sherwood, everybody's interested in Metro in this region, and Metro now says it's launching a training program that will begin weekly inspections of tracks and other systems at Metro. And there's a report that Adam Tuss from NBC4 had indicating that Metro board members seem to be dissatisfied with the information that they were getting from Metro, because they were apparently getting information that a lot of these problems have been cleared up before the problems flared up again.
Well, Metro's 40 years old, but its work rules and are horrible. Nobody knows whether things have been inspected or not. Just because someone signs off on a report doesn't mean that they in fact did the inspection. I think what you're seeing with Paul Wiedefeld, the new general manager, and Jack Evans as the chairman of the Metro board, is that the business as usual aspect of Metro for the last couple of decades is no longer going to survive, and that the employees, and about 10,000 of them have their contract up for renegotiation, are going to have to realize there's going to have to be more accountability, both from the management level. Bad management makes bad employees. It's not that the employees are horrible people. It's just that they have to have clear direction, and there has to be follow-up. And I'm hoping that this is the rebirth of Metro, but there's a long way between what they say they're going to do and whether they in fact get it done.
David Trone, if you're elected to the Congress of the United States, a lot of your constituencies will be federal workers who use Metro to get to work. What is your take on developments of Metro?
Clearly, Metro needs to be a major focus, and the reliability and the safety of Metro has been an issue. I applaud Paul Wiedefeld for shutting it down and taking the right steps, but it's a travesty that it had not been addressed before. Kind of emblematic of Congress, where they're thinking short term versus long term. No one's investing in the capital that's needed to make Metro reliable and safe and on time, and that has to change. We need to have Republicans and Democrats in Virginia, D.C., and here in Maryland working together.
What would you want Congress to do for Metro?
Congress has got to figure out how to make sure we support Metro. When you look at transportation in the area, since 1987, there's been two major transportation initiatives in Maryland: the Purple Line, fantastic, and the ICC. Yet Virginia's had 9 major transportation initiatives. So we need to stop having so many, studies, and we probably lead Virginia in studies, and work on improving transportation, because our citizens are sitting on the Beltway. They're not moving.
The federal government, in an agreement with Maryland, Virginia, and D.C., is offering up $150 million a year for 10 years. I think we're about halfway through that, or a little more, for capital improvements. The federal government pays zero for the operating cost of Metro. Do you think, given the impact of federal workers on the Metro system, do you think the federal government should be a partner in paying for the operating costs, and how would you pursue that in Congress if you were elected?
Yeah, given the fact that federal workers are hugely involved in Metro, and we need it to be clean and really work like the metros all around the world. I've been in metros, subways in London and Paris and many other places, and they just have a better system than we do. And why should the capital of America, the capital of the free world, have a lousy system? It doesn't make any sense.
We don't have the right to vote either, so there's just they go hand in hand.
But we're getting budget autonomy, which we'll be discussing later in this broadcast. Now, on to more specific questions for you, David Trone. You're running against a few fairly well-known individuals a few of whom already hold elected office, but your campaign has been described as historic because it may be the most expensive self-funded House race ever. You've said you'll spend what it takes to build name recognition. Just curious, how much have you spent so far?
About $5 million so far. And
whoa,
the answer is I'm a huge, huge underdog. We're up against, as you rightly pointed out, a couple of candidates that have been there in elected office for decades, and also another candidate that's been on TV for 25 years. So clearly a big underdog. And while I could have gone out and raised the money, and I've done a lot of financial fundraising, I've raised tens of millions for charities all over the country. But at the same time, I've also raised, over $1 million for Anthony Brown's race for governor.
That didn't turn out very well.
I knew
in a single night, we raised $1 million for President Obama recently. So raising the money would not have been an issue. But in this issue, my wife and I sat down and talked about it and said, if we're going to pursue this together as a family, we need to think about the cost. And the big cost is your time. And if you want to get something accomplished in Washington, the average congressman spends 60% of their time asking people for money. I don't want to spend my time asking people for money. I want to spend my time trying to get something done. So that's an important advantage for the people of the 8th District.
But what do you say to people when they say, you're a rich guy, you're trying to buy this seat that you don't have while you're in the community? You don't have really deep pocket, not deep pockets, but deep grounding in the 8th District, that you're a rich guy.
Actually,
your brother last year maxed out for Kathleen Matthews and gave her the maximum $2,700. Is he supporting you? Is Robert supporting you?
He's certainly supporting me. Before I announced and before I made the decision to run, my brother's very active in Catholic Charities, and Kathleen Matthews is
but then he gave her money for her congressional
race. So
why
they have
did
a
it take you
connection.
to the last moment?
They have a connection through Catholic Charities. So we wrote her a check before I even announced. But
why did
the real
it take
key
you?
is, I guess the real key is, all the candidates, all three of the major candidates will raise between, the other two major candidates will raise between $3 and $4 million and spend between $3 and $4 million. They're all multimillionaires. Matthews a multimillionaire. Chris Matthews.
Jamie Raskin is a multimillionaire.
Jamie Raskin's financial disclosure forms showed he's worth $6.5 million. So he's absolutely a multimillionaire.
What his wife does.
We know what his wife does.
Yeah, we know what, I'm sure we all know what his wife does. And that's part of the issue there again is how do we have separation from the lobbyist and from the PACs? And by not taking their money, I can be accountable just to the people of the 8th District, the people of Maryland.
You're looking at your notes there on all of these statements you're making, but I mean, you've been a businessman in all, how many states do you have a business?
I'm in 21 states.
And you've
right
been
now.
involved with lobbyists. I think you have a lobbyist in Annapolis, right? For your work.
Annapolis,
I mean, why is it that it's bad that, say, the lobbyists, I mean, the lobbyists are representing the very businesses and power groups that want to get something done too? Why is it they are all bad and lobbyists, only a rich guy is above Caesar's wife?
Yeah, lobbyists are certainly not all bad, of course not. But what lobbyists do is have a particular point of view, and if someone's taken a lot of money from a lobbyist, will get a seat at the table, and that's important to have a seat at the table.
Well, you said yourself, I signed my checks to buy access.
Yeah, that was that word "buy access" was a bad quote from Bill Turk, which I called Bill and told him.
Oh, you didn't say that?
Did not say that, and I told Bill that the following morning. Bill took no notes, and I've told Bill that crystal clear. But the bottom line is in Annapolis.
Bill Turk's a Washington Post reporter.
Bottom line is in Annapolis, we've worked hard to try and keep pro-consumer laws, but Annapolis, all they've done, when I first came to Maryland back in 1994, they passed a law that said you couldn't have a store bigger than 10,000 feet. That's very anti-consumer. They tried to pass a law that said you couldn't own a store in Maryland if you didn't live in Maryland.
When was this?
1994, 1996.
Well, you're not sure who your opponents are that would have been in office in 1994.
We've also tried with our lobbyists in Maryland to pass a law for the last 5 years that said you can own more than one store in Maryland. You mentioned earlier, Tom, when I come in, that you've seen our stores in Florida, and why should a company that has 500 jobs right here in Bethesda, 500 jobs, have to go to Florida and Texas and California to invest and build stores? We have 26 stores in Florida, and yet we can't build a store in Montgomery County. I'm allowed to have one store in Maryland. I have that in Towson. My brother has one in Laurel. And we've tried to change that law in Annapolis, but Annapolis doesn't care about the consumers. They don't care about more competition. Matter of fact, a good story would be back in, probably we had an 8-year lawsuit that settled in the early 2000s when we actually sued the state of Maryland. William Donald Schaefer, the comptroller at that time, he said, David, you need to sue the state because there's so many entrenched political interests in Annapolis from the liquor industry. And what you want to do is have quantity discounts, more competition, and lower prices for the consumer. And William Donald Schaefer said, I support that, but we can't get it through Annapolis because they're captured by the liquor
Why
lobby.
run straight to Congress? Why not first run for the General Assembly? William Donald Schaefer seemed to be suggesting that you should have more influence in the General Assembly.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks have Certainly don't need to start as a councilman. You don't need to start as a state delegate, and that's a nice way to start. But, you know, it's actually an insult to people that are living outside of the political bubble to say that there's not another set of life experiences that are really important. My experiences creating 5,000 jobs, my experiences in human resources, supply chain, finance, accounting, marketing, technology, all those experiences over a career of 30 years where I started with nothing. I grew up on a farm that my dad went bankrupt.
In Pennsylvania, where was the farm?
Pennsylvania, 15.
Because your ad, your very nice soft ad doesn't say where the farm
Yeah, the
is.
farm's 15 miles north of the district in East Berlin, Pennsylvania. I was born in Cheverly, Maryland. My mom and dad both graduated the University of Maryland. And my dad was the first person in his family ever to go to college.
But
and
you
thank
are,
God for the GI Bill for that.
but you are, as has been pointed out, a political novice, and maybe that's showing up in what's going on
Well,
with
he's
your
a political novice in running for office.
and running for office, because your yard signs, and in political campaigns, yard signs can be contentious. We just got a tweet from Julia who says Trone is putting his campaign signs up on public property without permission. Political signs are for private property, and last week Montgomery County Council member George Leventhal said the placement of your campaign signs on roadway, medians, parks, and elsewhere is illegal. Those signs require permits. Have you
There's a
addressed the issue?
$500 fine for each sign.
Everyone wants to respect the rules on that, and we certainly respect those. And there's yard signs up all over the district, and I'm not going to waste my time thinking about and talking about yard signs when we have some pretty important issues in the country. And
So
we
yard
should be-
sign, the
we
law
should-
saying don't clutter the streetscape is not important?
it's
Or is it
Stop.
just measurably not important compared to things you want to talk about?
well, getting lost on yard signs and George Leventhal grinding some axe, God bless him. But at the end of the day, we should be talking about getting long-term thinking in Congress, how Congress thinks long-term versus short-term. And that's just an example of the same kind of inward-looking, inside the beltway kind of politics, where they're trying to take their focus off things like NIH spending. Why can't we invest for the long term in NIH,
I suspect that
Alzheimer's,
all
and
of
things
your
like that?
opponents in the Democratic primary would say the same thing. They all describe themselves as progressive. You all appear to have similar views on the issues. What differentiates your candidacy from your opponents?
It's really a system, an approach to politics. As far as the progressive views, we'll have very similar progressive views. But the key is, I've not just been reporting the news. I've been creating the news, creating jobs all across the country, starting from nothing.
How do you
and
think that would
building
affect
a
your approach
large
to
business
politics?
with 5,000 plus employees.
How do you think that would affect your approach to politics?
The ability to work across the aisle, work with Republicans and Democrats as Americans, work together as a team to get something done.
That's
because
what Jamie Raskin says he does all the time in the Maryland legislature.
Yeah, Raskin has an advantage. There's 10 Republicans in the legislature. So for every one Republican, there's 3 Democrats. So Raskin will not be effective working in Washington when we're going to be a minority. We're going to be a minority in the House. That's a
And also
foregone
it takes
conclusion.
like 5 terms to get any power in the Congress. You're 60. You'll get power in Congress for committees or subcommittees. Maybe by the time you're almost 70 years old.
Yeah, well, I appreciate if you want to make age an issue, Tom. That's great.
I'm
But
70
at the end of
myself,
the-
so I can
yeah,
say that.
But at the
Almost.
no, it was a nice inoculation. But at the end of the day, I have businesses in 101 districts around the country. So in 101 congressional districts, I have jobs. I have thriving businesses. I've given millions and millions of dollars to charities. I know the governors from Connecticut to Texas, all around the country. I know the state legislators. I have connectivity. I have no interest in going to Congress as a mere freshman legislator. I was the largest donor of the DNC party last year. So it's a combination of connections, but business know-how and how to create win-win situations
Allow me to go
to move the issues forward.
Let me go to the telephones, because there's a John in Silver Spring, Maryland, who wants to ask you more specifically, I think, how you're going to do that. John, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. My question to you, David, is just, there's a lot of gridlock going on in Congress. What are you going to do to fix it?
It's talking, good question, John. It's talking about changing the type of people that we send there. With a 14% approval rating, we just can't keep sending the same type of people. And we need folks that love change, that want change, and that think it's a good thing and want new ideas. And we tried to talk about that throughout the campaign. Ideas about college debt, ideas about long-term medical spending and research. These are really important things.
How do you differ with them on with Kathleen Matthews? I mean, you, speaking of getting along with people, you just denigrated her as a TV anchor who had no substance, and I think you denigrated Jamie Raskin as, I guess, being there. I mean, I'm not sure what your criticism of him was, but I don't know how this works. I don't know how you take what's kind of campaign rhetoric and make that work.
Everybody has different things that they bring to Congress, and certainly reporting the news, that's a trait, and that has some value, certainly being in the state legislature for a decade plus. But I think it's clear that we need some change. We need some new ideas, and we can't just keep electing the same folks year after year, or we're going to keep getting the same result.
There's a candidate running for president that I'm sure you disagree with on most issues, who makes the argument that the fact that I was a successful businessman, the fact that I've contributed to campaigns around the country, the fact that I know a great deal of people, would make me a successful candidate and a successful president of the United States. You seem to be making a similar argument, even though you are, as I said, probably disagree with that candidate on most issues.
Yeah, we certainly disagree with that candidate on all issues. That candidate is the worst of what's of America. The lack of inclusivity, the lack of civility, the lack of just pure respect for other Americans is just wrong. But America is actually looking for something different. And that's what we hear all over the campaign trail. We need things done differently. And if we keep doing the same thing, we'll get the same result.
Okay, well, let's ask some issues. You talk about being inclusive and being different. You're the owner of how many employees overall?
5,000.
What is your position on the federal minimum wage? There's some proposal for it to go to $15 an hour in Montgomery County, and the mayor of the district has just proposed that. But the federal minimum wage is $7.25. What does your company start employees at?
And the company is really focused on our employees, and we start our employees higher than all of the competitors throughout the country. Wage rates are different, as you probably can appreciate, in South Carolina than they are in Washington State.
What about Toast and Towson?
But I don't get involved in what the prices are in Towson, but our point is this: if our company hires full-time people in retail, over 75%, so we can give them health care, short-term disability, long-term disability. We've banned the box. We have a free GED offered for our employees if they don't have a GED. We have domestic partner benefits since 2002.
Paid family leave?
Paid family leave we do not have. Our competitors do not have that either.
You support it?
I support it categorically.
Our guest is David Trone. He's a Democratic candidate for Congress in Maryland's 8th District. He's the owner of Total Wine and More, a wine retailer in Maryland. If you want to keep an eye on him, you can go to our website, kojoshow.org, and watch the live video stream of this broadcast. You can also ask questions or make comments there, or call us at 800-433-8850. Send us an email to kojo@wamu.org. We got an email from Scott in Silver Spring who questions Mr. Trone's comment that Annapolis doesn't care about consumers. He says they passed a law allowing direct wine shipments.
I think that's a great question. Annapolis did pass a law that if you own a winery in California or Washington State, you can ship cases to this state. Well, we were the 42nd state to pass that. So the Maryland legislators, they beat Mississippi and they beat Alabama. Congratulations. We support direct wine shipping. We think it's great. There is no, everyone's on the same page here. It just took them a decade later than everybody else to get around to it.
Okay. I want to, these are some issues I called around the district. You've talked about inclusiveness. I looked at the board for Total Wine and More. The board, and according to the website last night, it's 5 people, all of whom are white, 1 woman and 4 males. Is that inclusive for a company that does so much business?
We would love to have more people of diversity in the board, but it's a small board. It's 5 people, and that's where we are. But if we could find a candidate that was diverse, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. All right. You gave $5 million this year to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where you went, for the Trone Family Foundation to track, I think, congressional spending or do something new to try to figure out what Congress does. And people think that's a pretty good idea. But in terms of representing local Montgomery County and the 8th District up to Frederick and Carroll, have you given any kind of similar sums to Johns Hopkins? I'm going to give a talk to journalism students at Montgomery College this afternoon. Has Montgomery College received any funds from your vast business or personal wealth?
We've worked all over Montgomery County, worked all over Maryland, donated hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars all through Montgomery County. I gave an introduction yesterday at Rebuilding Together. We're celebrating the monies and the funds and the great work that group does. We supported Johns Hopkins. I'm currently funding a big study on lipids. Johns Hopkins, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. We didn't send out a press release on that since you asked, I'll tell you. But
right, I'm asking.
Yeah, well, since you asked, we did. And we've given a lot of money.
What about Montgomery College? Montgomery College has 25,000 students. 65% of them are part-time, meaning they mainly work while they try to improve themselves. It has a foundation, Montgomery College Foundation, and is always looking for ways to ease the tuition costs for them. I'm just wondering, can you just locally, you've done a lot of work. I looked at all the websites and all the good organizations across the country your company has supported. So I'm not suggesting you don't, but I'm looking for that local feel, that personal connection between you and an organization that you give either time or money to inside Montgomery County or
in the 8th district.
Yeah, just recently to answer that question, we've given to over 8,000 nonprofits last year through the company, $6.5 million.
But that's the national stuff.
In Maryland, Maryland's actually a big part of that because our headquarters is in Bethesda. Just at our grand opening of our new office, we donated $100,000 to 10 different charities, CASA, Rebuilding Together, and many others. Right here in local, all local, 100% local. All those 10 charities were represented at the grand opening with Chris Van Hollen was there to celebrate the new office. And we're very, very local. Local is the key thing in charity work all around the country. We love to be local.
Speaking of money donations, that's what Lisa in Silver Spring, Maryland wants to talk about. Lisa, you are on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I know that you've given tens of thousands of dollars to conservative Republicans like Roy Blunt from Missouri, who definitely does not represent my interests. How do I know that once you get in, you'll represent my interests, being pro-choice, as opposed to your business interests?
Well, that's a great question. Roy Blunt, I've given nothing to Roy Blunt. That was Kathleen Matthews that gave to Roy Blunt. But frankly, I have businesses all through the country. And if we have a business, say in Texas or North Carolina with thousands of employees, we make donations because the donations get us a seat at the table.
Isn't that the same thing as saying I signed my checks to buy access?
A seat at the table is different than what you've repeated.
What's the difference?
A seat at the table is to be able to press your case. And we've pressed our case on pro-consumer laws, laws that I think you guys would 100% support, laws like having the ability to sell craft beer. North and South Carolina, we passed that law. Laws that have the ability to sell alcohol on Sunday. Delaware, Georgia, South Carolina, we've passed that law. Laws to allow wine tastings, 15 states, we've passed those laws. Every single law we work on, every one is pro-consumer, just like I know a lot of folks here in Montgomery County would love to get rid of the LCE. And
what is the LCE?
Liquor Control Enforcement Group that runs Montgomery County's alcohol. So yes, you have to be involved in politics, but folks that are on the Republican side, we agree with them nothing personally, but at the same time, we work to create bridges, to do things that are pro-consumer, like the ones we just talked about.
Earlier this month, you sued the state of Maryland to halt the printing of early voting ballots. What was the issue there?
Yeah, the issue there was the state of Maryland's had defective voting machines since the last election, and they haven't done anything about it to fix them. And the fact that we have 9 people on the ballot and Chris Van Hollen has 10 on his ballot, he and I both end up on the second page of the ballot. And so that's not right. It's a voting rights violation, most likely, if litigated. So we asked them to stop, take a look at it, and make sure they treated that issue fairly with clear, precise instructions at the polls, so no one was disadvantaged by being put on the second page, especially through the disabilities community who will be voting on those machines in this race.
We got an email from Margaret who says, as a longtime government employee who has dealt with Congress people for years, I am really tired of business people denigrating government service and thinking that they can build a business, or thinking that because they can build a business, they can work miracles in Congress. I'd like Mr. Trone to explain exactly how his job creation business experience translates to developing legislation. I'd like to know why he thinks money qualifies him to move issues forward.
Yeah. What qualifies people to move issues forward is their life experiences. It's folks that have come into business, come into politics that have had no legislative experience, or folks like Jack Kennedy. First office was Congress, LBJ,
Well, Jack Kennedy.
Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, et cetera. So
Are you criticizing those?
No, I'm saying that it's a good thing to have folks come in that have other experiences in life than only business and than only politics. Having political experience is fine, but if everybody has exactly the same experience, that's not the type of Congress that's going to be effective, because everyone would look at the issue the same way. We need people to look at issues different ways, and having that experience in job creating, being entrepreneurial, working all across the country in 21 plus states, building a business, understanding technology, understanding finance, knowing how to ask the right questions. Congress needs people that can ask good questions to challenge the status quo.
Go back. What should the federal minimum wage be? It's $7.25 now. What would
I would love to see the minimum wage go to $15, but the most important thing is whenever it moves, we have to index it to inflation. We haven't touched it since 2009. The federal minimum wage needs to go up as high as we can get it. 15 is a great goal. It's probably not going to pass the Republicans, but we have to index it to inflation so it keeps going up. That's what's fair.
We got a tweet who asks, what is the candidate's position on marijuana legalization?
I support decriminalization of marijuana. I do not support legalization of marijuana. I've been very involved with the American Civil Liberties Union on criminal justice, and this piece plays into that because we're putting our people who should have drug treatment or not be at all arrested, not arrested at all, decriminalized, into jail, and that's leading to all kinds of problems. We need to focus, as the committee we put together with the left and the right for the ACLU, to focus on before people go to prison, have less go to prison through decriminalization and better drug laws.
If you legalize it, there wouldn't be an issue. But wouldn't legalizing marijuana be in direct competition to your business, the booze?
As not a single study ever showed that, but it's
I don't know what the alcohol rate is in Colorado these days.
Yeah, well, there's no competition there whatsoever, and many people think that would be good for my business because I would probably be the folks that would sell it. And we've decided not to go that particular route. Washington State, the same folks that regulate alcohol also do marijuana.
You got the last question.
The big picture here, and you've heard these questions, you've heard them on the campaign trail. You're a successful businessman, you and your brother. You're very successful across the country in many places. But your ties to the local Maryland 8th District are fairly thin. It's all from a money, top-down, almost disembodied approach. You're a very good person. You've supported charities across the country, all of that, with your own personal money and your corporate money. It seems that to the many people I talk to, some for you, some against, that you are trying to parachute in with a virtual golden parachute and win this race. And just in a quick summary, how do you respond to that?
The people in Maryland or Maryland 8th District are really smart. They're really educated. And what they want to hear is, can someone bring a change to Washington? Can we do something different than what we've done? And if
Well,
we
what
don't-
Van Hollen
if
was
we
a
don't-
great. Most people say whether you're for him for the Senate or not, they say Van Hollen was exactly what you were
I
talking.
think Chris,
He worked with people. He thought he worked across the aisle. He sought change. He did everything that you're saying should be done.
Chris Van Hollen is an excellent congressman. I support him for the U.S. Senate. He'll be a great U.S. senator. But at the same time, not every district has that. And the chance for a district to have someone that can step into Chris Van Hollen's shoes and ask the right questions. On the budget committee, Chris understood things to ask. I understand business, how to ask those kind of questions. And that can be a refreshing change to politics as usual.
David Trone, he's a Democratic candidate for Congress in Maryland's 8th District. He's the owner of Total Wine & More, a wine retailer in Maryland. Thank you for joining us. Good luck to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Okay, thanks.
Coming up
Thank you.
next is Walter Smith. He is Executive Director of DC Appleseed, and we'll talk with him about the Superior Court judge's ruling granting budget autonomy to the District of Columbia. And Tom Sherwood, speaking of budgets, Mayor Muriel Bowser of DC presented her budget this week. What stands out to you about it? School construction, maybe?
Well, what stands out about it is that although there's a limit on how much more money the city can spend each year, as Jack Evans, the Finance and Revenue Chairman, told me, the city is, I think he used the word awash in cash for, unlike the budget deficits of 10, 15 years ago, the city's had nearly 20 years of balanced budgets. There's enough money for virtually everything that city government wants to do. So yes, there's more money. The mayor's speeding up the rebuilding of the city's public schools. The city administrator said yesterday, since I think this began under Tony Williams, that the city has spent $4 billion on redoing or rebuilding every city school, 110 of them. And now there's like 10 or 12 more. And the last $1 billion is going to be spent, and she's going to speed it up. And she's going to add more money to the school system. It's a fairly progressive budget. We still have to look at the details, as Council Chairman Phil Mendelssohn said. But in her speech this week, she named every council member and called them out on something good so that she can work to get this budget passed. It's a very progressive budget. And she said to me yesterday, there are a lot of states and a lot of cities would like to be in the financial situation the District of Columbia is.
Well, a Republican member of Congress has said that if you see all the cranes going up over Washington, D.C., it is clear that federal taxpayers are supporting all
I
of
hate to
this
say it, I don't know
development
that
in
term. He's
Washington.
a fool.
And he's saying that Washington probably needs a recession. It's something we'll be discussing on this broadcast come Monday.
He's
And
a
I'd like to hear
fool.
what Walter Smith has to say about that. He is the executive director of DC Appleseed, a nonpartisan organization which collaborates with partners to advance policy issues in the DC region. If you have comments or questions about budget autonomy for the district, Walter Smith is the guy to ask. Call now, 800-433-8850. Walter, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
You can also go to our website, kojoshow.org, watch the live video stream, watch Walter in action, or ask questions or make comments there. At her State of the District address on Tuesday, Mayor Bowser specifically thanked your organization, DC Appleseed, for your work on budget autonomy. Last week, a Superior Court judge upheld the Budget Autonomy Act, which DC voters approved in a referendum in 2013. The Washington Post praised the, quoting here, creative legal strategy behind this legal ruling. Tell us about that and the legal basis behind it, because last I heard, a federal judge, Emmett Sullivan, had ruled against this. So tell us about the creative strategy that resulted in this decision.
Well, the creative strategy is that we think, and the court agreed with us, that under the Home Rule Act, the Superior Court agreed with us that under the Home Rule Act, that in fact, we have the authority here in the district to make changes to laws passed by Congress. And in this case, we did it to advance democracy for the city.
But how did that square with Emmett Sullivan's ruling back in 2013 that said we couldn't?
The Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals, determined the lawsuit didn't belong in the federal courts. And so the Court of Appeals vacated the decision that Judge Sullivan had issued. We have said from the beginning, this is a local law issue. It belongs in the local courts. And the lawsuit was originally brought in the local Superior Court.
Let's be clear for people who don't follow this.
Okay.
The city has like a $13 billion budget.
Right.
Of that, how much money is roughly raised from local tax sources, sales, property, income, those things, and how much of it's federal? Just a rough idea is good for this.
Roughly 7.3 billion of the 13.4 billion is the local budget.
Okay, 7
and the
billion
federal
out of
is
13.
6 billion and change.
And so budget autonomy, as I understand it, is that the city under the Home Rule Act, because of the way it was worded, does not in fact have to get yearly approval of how it spends its local money,
Right.
and only the federal money is subject to a congressional review.
That's the theory. That's the theory. I'd offer one tiny change, though. Under the Constitution, everything the DC Council passes has to be reviewed by the Congress of the United States. What's changed is we can send up our local budget for the 30-day review in Congress.
Right.
If they don't specifically overturn it, it becomes law.
And that is the basis for all routine legislation that goes, that the city passes, except for emergency bills.
That's right.
However, I have yet to hear, and I've asked several people involved in this, the Republican House has said it does not agree with what the voters voted for. It doesn't agree with the ruling by the court, and that there will be, in times coming, Congress is simply going to reiterate through a rider on some law or something with the city's budget to reassert that the entire budget, $13 billion, must get the approval of Congress. And do you get any sense of that happening?
Well, first of all, the Republican House didn't say that. There were certain people on a certain committee who expressed that view. But Tom, that was before the court acted. The people who said that argued we didn't have the authority to do what we've done. Now the courts have said we did have the authority to do what we've done, and I'm very hopeful.
But that's a local court. That's not a federal court. The federal court is what will judge what the Congress does.
Well, no. Here in the District of Columbia, the theory is that local law issues should be finally decided by the local courts.
I agree that
Congress itself created.
Well, in terms of what Tom is saying, I read a report where the only way that this can be overturned would be by a vote in the full House and a vote in the full Senate, and then the president can choose to veto that, and they probably don't have enough votes to overturn that veto. Is that
I think
correct?
that is right. When we send our local budget up in May or June of this year, unless, as you say, Kojo, both houses of Congress specifically reject it, and the Congress then approves that rejection, it will become binding. But to pick up on Tom's point, at the end of the day, the Congress of the United States always has the authority to change our laws.
What if the House doesn't vote on the city's budget because you sent it up to them in an improper form, and they just don't vote on it? So what happens?
Well, under the budget autonomy law, which is now binding, so long as we follow the requirements of that law and send it up for the 30-day review in June, after the 30 legislative days expires, we are authorized by law, a law, by the way, that did pass review in Congress, to spend our local dollars as we choose.
Well, for those people who are listening who are saying, yes, we understand this arcane legal argument, but what does this mean in practical terms for DC residents? Why is budget autonomy important for them?
It's a good question, and I think it does several really important things for us. First of all, under this new law that's now been upheld by the court, we should never face a shutdown again in the District of Columbia. We faced it before when the federal government couldn't get its act together and pass an appropriation act for itself and for us. We don't have to wait for that anymore. So we're protected from a shutdown. It also lends much greater stability and certainty to our budgeting process, which Dr. Gandhi talked about a lot.
That was the former CFO.
It allows us to change our fiscal year if we decide to, and there's a lot of sentiment for doing that, to match our school year, as a lot of other jurisdictions have done. It also vindicates the power of the people of the District of Columbia to change the law and to advance democracy, and it confirms that the district has authority under the Home Rule Act to make changes to congressional enactments.
I just say that as a district citizen, I hope that everything you say is true. But I get a sense, and I got this from talking to some people in the city government yesterday, I get a whiff of a little bit of whistling past the graveyard, that this is all good as long as Congress doesn't act. and this idea that it's got to pass the House, it's got to pass the
Right.
Senate. Well, you know, the president has thrown the city overboard before.
Right.
They can attach a rider to some non-germane legislation. They can add a sentence to the Budget Act and just wipe out all of the court ruling and all the work that you guys have done. Isn't that a very real possibility?
Well, it's always a possibility.
But a real possibility.
Well, I don't know. I would like to think.
I mean, they didn't do anything on marijuana, and they didn't do anything
Yeah.
on same-sex marriage. I mean, all these, you know, some
Yeah.
people say lunatic,
Yeah.
right-wing Republicans
Yeah.
that scream about this,
Yeah.
but they haven't done anything.
I agree. But as Tom Davis pointed out, and he supported this, budget autonomy has wide bipartisan support on the Hill for the
Okay,
District of
good.
Columbia. And the reason why he supported this new budget autonomy law was Congress simply couldn't get it done for lots of reasons.
Everything you said, it makes it sound great. And again,
Yeah.
as a district citizen,
Right.
I'm 100% personally for
Right.
everything you've just
Right.
said. I just have more suspicion.
Well,
of
and
Congress
you're
that
right too. You're right too. But if we don't try, we're not going to achieve
But here's another
anything.
wrinkle. The D.C. Attorney General Carl Racine, whose office litigated on behalf of the district's chief financial officer, says his office will now review the judge's ruling. What's the implication of that?
Well,
No, I didn't. I think they followed
there's
up and
later
said they're
news.
not. They followed up and said they're not
There's
going to.
later news.
They're not gonna review it after all?
appeal that.
He's
ruling.
not going to appeal. This is
Right.
now final. From my viewpoint, the residents of the district and the mayor and the council have won, and we should now proceed. And by the way, the council is going to proceed pursuant to this new law that's now been upheld, and they will, for the first time in the history of the District of Columbia, send up just the one budget. We're going to send up the local budget just for the 30-day review. We're not going to send it under the Budget Request Act
Right.
anymore.
Well, but as Kojo had the right question, what does it mean for the taxpayer, for the person who receives city services? And the main thing you said was there's no interference or disruption from the Congress's inability to pass the budget. Is there anything else in the benefit? I mean, you heard me talk earlier. I think the city is just in unbelievably financially good condition now. Nearly 20 years of balanced budgets, $2 billion in the not just sitting there, but set aside. It's very, very healthy. It's just, and you've done stuff on AIDS work in the city, several other, your Appleseed. The city seems to be doing really, really well, and we're going to have a more liberal DC council to push more things like paid family leave and part-time worker sick leave, all these things that have passed or are pending. What is your own view of the health of the city?
I think the health of the city is much better. I still think there's a lot of ways to go. I think a lot of the focus of the mayor and the council is on bringing some of the great economic opportunity that's represented by the cranes and represented by the additional revenues to make sure that we allow low-income folks in the city to benefit from this great new revenue that's coming.
Do you
into
support
the
the
city.
Wizards training and Mystics home field facility in Ward 8?
Well, DC Appleseed has not taken a position on that, so I'm not going to comment.
What about $15 an hour minimum wage?
I was
You're a
about to get to
nonprofit.
that.
You've got to pay $15 minimum wage.
The mayor has proposed a $15 an hour minimum wage. By 2020, your organization has testified before the council on raising the minimum wage and indexing it to inflation. Is it important now that the mayor is taking that issue on?
I think it is.
Are you for it?
I think it is. Well, we've not studied the proposal that came out yesterday, but Kojo was
It's
quite
not,
right.
There's nothing to it. It says $15 an hour by 2020.
Right. That is what
It'll
she's
just be
proposed.
graduated
and,
up to
And one of the things that's going to happen is a lot of people are going to do some calculations. I mean, and part of what's going to happen now is because of the number of things that the council is looking at right now, including one you mentioned a moment ago,
Paid
paid
family
family
leave.
leave, to see how all of this fits together to make sure that we not only bring new benefits to low-income folk, but we do so in a way that protects businesses and their competitiveness and their ability to attract and retain good people.
The right to adopt our own budget is, of course, part of the campaign for DC voting rights and for DC statehood. So what's next there?
Well, one of the things I said a minute ago is that I think this recent ruling makes pretty clear that we have broader authority under the Home Rule Act to advance democracy than a lot of people thought. And I believe we now need to start using that authority to press other efforts forward for democracy, including voting rights. And we're looking at that now. The mayor and the council are looking at that now, and I think there's a significant possibility you're going to see some movement on that very soon.
We just had a candidate, David Tronin, from Maryland 8th, who is self-financing himself, and he has written checks across the country to get his business to be successful. What I haven't understood on the voting rights effort is, where is the, I hate to use this phrase, but where is the sugar daddy or sugar mama who has the money to set up a nonprofit organization and to raise the money to do what you cannot do in your own struggling business?
30 seconds left to respond to that.
I believe there are a lot of funders and donors in this city who are more interested now than they've ever been in the issue of advancing statehood and democracy for the district. And I look for some people to be supporting that effort in a big way coming soon.
Particularly as the city's going to
Walter
go up to
Smith
900,000.
is the executive director of DC Appleseed. Walter Smith, thank you very much for joining us. Tom Sherwood, he's our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist with the current newspapers. Always a pleasure.
I'm going out to Rockville as soon as I leave here.
That's it for the show today. But remember, we're not just on air. As we announced yesterday, we're going to be hosting a community event in Anacostia on the evening of Wednesday, April 6th. We'll discuss crime, policing, and neighborhood safety across the city and the unique issues facing communities east of the Anacostia. Visit kojoshow.org for more details and to reserve your free seat right now. While you're there, if you missed the debate we hosted on this show last week between Donna Edwards and Chris Van Hollen, the leading Democratic candidates for Maryland's Senate seat, check out the audio and video. Head over to our blog where you'll find lots of great stories to keep you informed and entertained this weekend. And be sure to meet us back here Monday at noon when we'll be discussing the comments of an Iowa congressman who says D.C. needs a recession. Tom Sherwood says he's an idiot. Also, Maryland communities debate the use of tasers. Thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nnamdi.